What's your order?
We're going to do politics, narrative, soft power, and case.
Politics, narrative, soft power, case.
Yes, sir.
Great.
I am going to be reading a new card he's getting. I'll get that to you after the speech. All right, everyone ready? Okay. All right, so first of all, talking about midterms, they really had no warrants to their arguments, so extend all of the arguments brought up in the 1NC. They weren't addressed. Now moving on to narratives. Basically, in the last speech, my opponent addressed the arguments of the narratives by saying that narratives break down stigmas. They break down this idea of thinking of people basically as a number, that we can actually get to know personal experiences, we can see how people are affected directly and indirectly, and so therefore it's a good idea. While this sounds conceptually like it might work, he didn't actually respond to any of the analysis that I brought up in the multiple cards that I read in the 1NC. So let's take a look back at what I said in the 1NC. So extend the Scott 91 evidence talking about using personal experiences to establish legitimacy of argument essentializes differences. It really prevents an analysis of the ideological systems that shape the construction of the experience. So it goes against the very basis of what the narrative would be used for to begin with. So it actually ends up hurting in the long run. Also extend the second Scott 91 evidence talking about experience is defined in self-serving terms to eliminate the questioning of its foundational status. So you have people who are telling their stories and they tell it in self-serving terms. So while maybe hearing your stories is a good idea, it's not something that was really relevant to an academic activity, to a debate round where we are discussing really the pros and cons of whether we legalize prostitution or we stick with the squall where it's illegal. Because it's not something that is, while nothing can be unbiased, it's not something that is completely clear in their thinking. Now, the next point, extend the third Scott 91 evidence, talking about it's not, we shouldn't use experience as the basis for authority. Again, this is like what I was just saying, that to use like a first-hand report is not, in this particular instance, it's not the authority on the subject. So again, it sounds like a nice idea conceptually, but narratives really, they don't break down stigmas. You can't really break down a stigma just by telling a story. And it's not something, you can't just respond by saying it works, but in the long run it ends up just hurting their position. Now, let's move on to soft power. And, all right, so what we talked about under soft power was how the U.S. soft power is declining right now. Specifically, why soft power declining is a bad thing is it devalues the use of force and ensures global chaos, instability, and great power war. So extend the Scrutin 14 card, talking about destabilizing the country and devalues use of force, which leads to a power war. If we look at the 20th century, we can see that soft power was responded to in certain ways that caused the Great Wars. Again, ultimately that leads to the Litcherman 14 evidence that leads to planetary extinction. And if we're going to talk about the link to...
Yeah, just read that one.
All right, so again, the link is extend the Weitzer 12 evidence, talking about legalizing prostitution is popular internationally. And again, just ultimately, soft power isn't a good thing. It undermines hard power. We need hard power for global stability. Now let's move on to solvency.
Real quick, on that
yeah.
link, the reason why that's a link is because the countries look at our implementation of the plan as a
right.
way to relate to other
countries. Look at the implementation of the plan as a way to
relate to the other countries.
Relate to the other countries. All right, so moving on down to solvency. So they talked about first thing, they talked about legalization allows for a change of perspective of people. That if we legalize prostitution, the people's opinions are going to change. There isn't going to be that stigma there. Any cross-examination asked, how does passing a law change someone's worldview? How does it change someone's convictions, their beliefs, their opinions, the way that they choose to look at the world and respond to analyze situations? It was like, well, it just kind of does. There was really no answer to this. The bottom line is, think about it logically. You can't just pass a piece of legislation. You can't put something down on a piece of paper and it automatically, magically change everyone's opinion. While yes, it would be nice if we could get rid of stigmas that way. It would be great if we could actually make it where people didn't think badly of people who are being discriminated against for whatever reason. It just doesn't work that way. That's an idealistic world. That isn't a response to the argument. Legalization doesn't change the perspective of people just by passing a piece of legislation. It's not going to change the stigma. And they also talked about that it empowers women, talking about the coalitions. Again, if we look back at the 1NC, you can see to extend the legalization increases trafficking, Chiwetel 13, extend that evidence, talking about that legalizing marijuana actually increases trafficking, and then also extend IT 8, that legalization increases violence against women. So just because they're going to be able to unionize prostitution doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to empower them. It actually increases violence against women. And again, extend the Monroe and Augusta 8 argument under solvency that regulation is too burdensome, that legalization fails the Matthews 8, extend that as well, that it expands street prostitution, and also extend that empirics prove too many unforeseen consequences.
All right, 246 for the ad.
Bump that for a little bit.